We heard as we started the show today, we have a guest joining us, Dr. Everett Piper. He is joining us by phone. I think you'll be able to see him, though. He's been joining us on the show before, and the first time I had him on the show was to smile with him and enjoy what he wrote when he was still president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University. He wrote a piece that was entitled, essentially, "This is not a daycare." It was a letter to the students, followed by becoming a book. A great, insightful piece that was essentially saying to students in college campuses, you're not here to be a snowflake, you're not here to make sure that you never are offended. You're here to learn, to listen to ideas, to engage in the robust debate of ideas. And so he became pretty famous for just that one book, Not a Daycare, but he is now retired as president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, but he's a widely read, he's an author, a pundit, a commentator, contributes regularly to Washington Times, and he's just a wonderful thinker about politics and especially the role of faith in America. So I believe we have Dr. Piper online. Hello, sir.
How you doing, Debbie? Thanks for having me on.
I'm glad to have you. Welcome to the show. So would you like to make any comments about the Iowa caucus, or should we roll with what we're going to talk about?
Well, I've heard that that the new campaign slogan for the DNC is "Make America Confused Again."
Okay,
I mean,
that's good.
I mean, through corruption and incompetence and coin tosses, they're going to make America confused. I guess that's their goal. I guess they're proving that to be the case. Also, I think you can hear an evil laugh off in the corner of Hillary Clinton as she chuckles that her operatives are apparently the ones that have sabotaged this whole process. The only thing that I have not heard from the Democratic Party that you would expect to hear is that they're blaming Donald Trump for this. But the day's young. They probably still will.
Maybe they didn't think of it until now. Now you've given them another idea. Yeah, that blaming Trump would be the next trick. Well, I want to turn to there's so many topics that we could be talking about today. And I'm so glad you're able to join me. You write regularly, which I really appreciate. You write very well, for the Washington Times. And you had a piece, I read a lot, and I'm very tuned into the issues in America that really drive leftists, including the advocacy for abortion. But your article, it was called "Liberals' Big Brother Push for Federally Funded Abortion" in the Washington Times. I want to talk about the things that you presented in that article and actually urge our listeners to read it. I put the link up to it on our website, americacanwetalk.org. On the homepage, under shows, drop down list of links, you'll find a link to this article. So there was a presentation by Kenneth Roth. Kenneth Roth, he has a name that you could mispronounce easily, I guess. He is the president of a group called the Human Rights Watch, and he testified before the U.S. Commission on Unalienable Rights and was talking about abortion. So I want to go to your article and just kind of run through some of the things he said and get your take on his views and kind of how out of touch they are with America. But this is, again, Kenneth Roth testifying before the U.S. Commission on Unalienable Rights on this subject, and he is president of Human Rights Watch. So to start out, you noted that in his testimony, Kenneth Roth talked about the idea that, and he was advocating for abortion, access to it, legality, and all that. But he said in his testimony, millions of deaths could be prevented by abortion. Do you know what he's talking about there?
Doublespeak. One of the phrases I use in my column is you can hear Orwell laughing. This is so Orwellian because he's arguing, number one, that the humanity of an unborn child is not even worthy of our consideration. Number two, that the guarantees for religious freedom, the unalienable right of religious freedom that our constitutional republic is guaranteed, he is telling us that freedom of religion is only the freedom of belief. It's not the freedom to practice that belief in the public square. Do you hear that? You're an attorney. You hear that very well. The people listening to us need to understand what he just said, that religion, freedom of religion, is what you hold in your head. It certainly can't be what you do with your hands or what you practice in your profession or in the public square. You must be silent when it comes to expressing that faith in public. Is that what our founding fathers guaranteed us? I don't think so. But this man is arguing that indeed that should be the case, especially when it comes to those people who believe, because of religious conviction, that an unborn child is human and should be given all the rights and privileges and protections of any other human being within our culture. This man might as well start arguing that we sacrifice our children to Moloch, because that's exactly what he is setting this culture up for, that you can terminate a human being up to seconds before birth and celebrate it as your rights just because it's convenient for you. And nobody with a religious conviction to the contrary should be permitted in our public square to express those views. Like I said, you can hear George Orwell laughing.
You know, I'm so glad you read this article. I had actually missed this story of this testimony by this gentleman, Human Rights Watch president before the U.S. Commission on Unalienable Rights. You know, he also talks about the idea, and the way he speaks about people of religious values, he's trying to say, or he does say essentially, you might think that, but there is no place in the American contemplation of creation of policy. There's no place among lawmakers for considering the views that people hold about when life starts, the value of life, if those views are based on religion. He's really writing out the whole notion that religious values can shape policy in America. I think that's also contrary to the perception of America that our founders held. What do you say?
Well, stop and think about the logical end of his ideas. If there is no place for a religious discussion about the dignity of the human being, then what he is arguing that there's only a place in the legal setting for a materialistic, a naturalistic, a discussion of who we are as human beings. So if anybody like you or I come along and argue, or Anthony Scalia or anybody else comes along and starts arguing that a human being is actually the imago Dei, stamped with the image of God. We have dignity, we have moral culpability, we have moral awareness, we have responsibility. We're not the imago Dei, we're not the imago dog, we're not made in the image of an animal, we're the imago Dei, we're made in the image of God. That argument for human dignity has to be immediately silenced in this man's worldview, because you and I are nothing more than dust, than dirt. We are nothing more than an animal. We're nothing more than the dog, the pig, the cat, the cow, to quote PETA. And that has to be the end all and the be all of the discussion of what it means to be human. How in the world can this man argue under the banner of human rights when he is dumbing down the definition of what it means to be a human being to nothing but dust and dirt? This is the degradation of human identity. It is the abolition of human freedom, because you can't be free if you're not human. And you and I would have no rights within this man's world to argue, because we're arguing from a religious perspective, because we think that the founding fathers, when they said that we are endowed by our Creator with certain self-evident truths and unalienable rights, that we should be able to discuss that in the public square.
So well said. He actually extends his argument, and everything he says is really profound and very helpful. He extends his argument to this idea that instead of having thinkers in America, people committed to the notions in the very founding of our country, the Declaration of Independence, that we're all created equal, that we have rights from our Creator simply because we were born, all of that. He's dismissing all of that and saying instead of that kind of thought used to approach policymaking, he's specifically urging the idea that policymakers must defer to the United Nations and their team of experts in applying international law, does not like the idea of sovereign authority in any country to take the absolutist position. He's calling respect for human life of the unborn an absolutist position, but he's really arguing for individual countries should not be able to make that final decision. We've got to defer to these alleged experts who are policymakers within the United Nations. Why don't we? That is actually such a sovereignty surrendering idea. It's hard to even answer that, except just to reject it out of hand. But your comments?
Well, let's go back to the Democratic Party. This man just described the Democratic Party's platform. There is one candidate for the presidency on the Democratic side right now that would disagree with what he just said. All of them are radical pro-choice up to the point of birth. Pete Buttigieg isn't even acknowledging that it's a bad thing that somebody in his hometown of South Bend, Indiana, was discovered with over 2,000 fetuses that he had been keeping after he aborted them, and that he was collecting these human body parts for some reason. And Buttigieg doesn't want to critique that as being something that should be stopped. Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, the list goes on. They all are embracing the radical degradation of the human being because we can kill our youngest children right now for the sake of convenience. And there is no one who should be able to stop that. And if we do have a religious movement within the United States, then that should be stopped by the United Nations, because international law should trump any local law. This is power. This is a one world government, if you will. And the Democrats actually embrace this model of power. They don't distance themselves from it in any way whatsoever.
You know, yes, absolutely. You know, this idea, he's really mocking and dismissing any notion of Christian virtue or Christian morality as shaping America, shaping our thinking about policies, not just about abortion, but all sorts of policies. And I do think there's a certain level of fault to be laid at the feet of education, academia, not just in college, but I mean in the K through 12 levels, where the teaching of the founding idea of America, of what the ideas of our founders, what they were trying to write when they set out the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, what they were trying to create. We have permitted over decades the change in the presentation in history and in government classes for students where there's no notion, because we have falsely elevated this separation of church and state idea, gotten to the point that there is almost a dismissal of whether Christian virtue, Christian morality rooted in the scriptures should be part of our policy conversation at all. And I know you worked very hard in your time as a college president at Oklahoma Wesleyan to again teach that idea about America's founding. But isn't there a certain fault to be laid at the feet of the of academia in America that we could get to the point that this guy could make this argument with a straight face?
Oh, absolutely. My industry is responsible for this. Higher education, and frankly, secondary education and even elementary education. American education in general is responsible for the mess that we're now in. We've created this monster. In fact, I would argue that 100% of the culpability for this problem lies at the feet of education and the church, because we stopped teaching objective truths in the academy and we stopped teaching the truths of Scripture at the pulpit. And when you combine those two things, you lose any context for truth being the measuring rod of culture any longer. C.S. Lewis once said, you can do no measuring without a measuring rod outside of those things being measured. I'll say that one more time. You can do no measuring without a measuring rod outside of those things being measured. And that's where we are right now. If there is no such thing as truth to judge the debate, if it all boils down to power and privilege and politics, if it all boils down to personality, then you and I, if we have the biggest stick or the highest podium, we win. Or if our opponent has the biggest stick or the highest podium, they win. They crush us. They become Big Brother. They tell everybody else to be silent. Abraham Lincoln once said, what is taught today in the classroom will be practiced tomorrow in our government. What is taught today in the schoolroom will be practiced tomorrow in the government. Hitler said, let me control the textbooks and I will control the state. Yep. Richard Weaver, 1948, ideas have consequences. Teach lousy ideas, you're going to get lousy consequences in culture. You teach these kids for decades that they're nothing but an animal. They've risen up out of the primordial soup. They're not endowed by their creator with anything because there is no creator. And what do? You get a bunch of people that start acting like animals. And that's where we are today.
Well, that is a great segue to my next topic, speaking of acting like animals. So over the weekend, I'm going to guess many of our listeners watched the Super Bowl. We did too. You know, we watched with a bunch of friends. And the halftime show at the Super Bowl, we were with a bunch of friends who were all, you know, church-going Christians. And honestly, there was pretty much dead silence during and it was the big screen setup and pretty much silence during the halftime show. And if any of you didn't see it, it was a performance of music and dancing by two different people, Shakira and Jennifer Lopez. But the commentary afterward, the gist of it was extremely sensual, sexual, provocative, revealing. The dances were very just sensual, suggestive. I don't even know what the words were they were singing, but the dancing was just extremely sensual. So afterward, a lot of commentary followed. And I will tell you that, Dr. Piper, I even heard conservative friends of mine, and I don't know if they were trying to virtue signal to say, hey, we're not the puritanical, people that the Democrats try to say we are, it was fine. Yeah, it was entertainment. It was fine. I think, I'm going to ask your reaction, I swear, but I had wanted to pop off about this today. I think it is such an insult to women. It is not empowering women. It is playing into the whole objectification of women, the whole thing the Me Too movement said they wanted to end. I would love more public condemnation. And I also just think the idea that would even be chosen is somewhat a reflection of our culture. So I don't even know if you watched the Super Bowl, but what do you have to say?
The objectification of women, you just summarized it. How can you be pro-woman when you treat women like an object? How can you be Me Too when women are an object of sexual recreation? When you've dumbed down sex to nothing but consumption and recreation rather than elevating that to a level of dignity? How can you be pro-woman when you deny that women are real, which is what the LGBTQ argument is? You're not even real. You don't exist. You're a leprechaun. You're a unicorn. You're a fabrication. You're a fantasy. You're not an objective fact. You're not real. And therefore, I can raise my hand on any given day and say, I'm a woman, and I can take your bathroom. I can take your privacy. I can take your dignity. I can take your identity away from you because I'm pretending to be a woman because women aren't real. Now, if you are a feminist, how can you deny the reality of the feminine? If you are pro-woman, how can you deny the biological fact of women? And if you're claiming that women should be given dignity, why in the world would you objectify them like they did in this particular program? We are the classical feminists. We are the classical liberals. We believe in liberty and liberation and freedom and justice. We believe in the female, therefore we are feminists. The irony today is that as a conservative who believes in conserving the time-tested truths of God, those self-evident truths that are endowed to us by our Creator, as a conservative, I'm more classically liberal, if you will, than my left-of-center counterpart because I'm conserving the dignity of women, the identity of women. I'm not going to objectify them. I'm going to honor them. I'm not going to put you on the cover of Sports Illustrated and say, look, recreation, 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 Sports Illustrated. Women are nothing but sport. That's exactly what you saw in the Super Bowl halftime show. You should be offended by it because it degraded you. It dumbed you down. It made you an object rather than elevated you. Back to my point at the beginning of the show, the Imago Dei.
Well said. I'm thinking I'm going to go back and replay and memorize some of those lines. They were very, very good. Thank you so much. And I couldn't agree more. I don't know if we probably enough said on that because I want to hit one more topic. So tonight is the State of the Union. We're going to talk a little later in the show about President Trump's decision to go forward with the State of the Union, despite that the Senate is going to do their vote to acquit tomorrow. And today they're, in fact, holding long, blathering hearings where the senators are weighing in on whatever they have to say. But President Trump's going forward. On the State of the Union, though, I want to ask you, Dr. Piper, I think that for Christian Americans, many of them, us, may have been very surprised to discover after President Trump was elected, he really went along with a lot of what the Christian conservative agenda would be asking a president to do. He's been pro-life. He has been, in fact, very, in surprising ways, he's been asserting pro-life. He spoke up at the March for Life. He went there to actually speak about the virtue and value of life. So there's to my sense of things, the leftists in this country are, the very idea of America is under assault in 100 different ways. And President Trump, in my sense, is moving forward, protecting the idea of America. So first of all, just as a Christian activist American, what do you want to hear President Trump say in the State of the Union?
I had the privilege of meeting him once during the primary of the last election. At the time I met him, I was not a huge fan. I hadn't decided that I could support the man yet because I just had problems with his past moral behavior. I left there being encouraged because the one thing I asked him when I was given the opportunity to do so in Trump Tower was this: Mr. Trump, should you become president of the United States, I have one request of you. leave me alone.
Yeah.
Let me be Christian. Just leave me alone. Stop trying to impose federal largesse upon me. Stay out of the business of the church. Stay out of the business of trying to define marriage. Stay out of the business of trying to tell me that I have to provide transgender accommodations on my Christian college campuses. Leave me alone. And here's what I've learned since he was elected. That's what he's done. He's left me alone. He has let me be Christian. He's like Constantine of old. I don't know whether Constantine was a believer or not. I would argue Constantine was a pagan. But that pagan, God used in his sovereignty to pat the church on the head and release us to do our good work. And I think Trump is doing the exact same thing. Thank God for Constantine. I'm grateful for Christendom. Thank God for President Trump. He's leaving me alone.
I do love that. It's been a very interesting time, though, because I think that, I think you and I have talked about this before, people are aware of it, but there was an effort on the, I always like to call them the anti-American left, but on the left to penetrate the churches, the Christian church in America, to try to shift their views on certain issues so that Christians would feel unsure of how they should vote, that they could be manipulated toward voting for left-wing ideas because the theology of Christianity was being tweaked by leftists. Is a very conscious decision, a very, at the highest level, funded by George Soros and various of his accolades and groups that he's formed. But the particular issue I think that is going to be among many big issues in 2020 has to do with immigration, border security, and kind of citizenship and sovereignty. The left has managed to make the argument that, and to some, with some effect, positive effect in the Christian church in America, that in order to be consistent with Jesus' teaching that we must love our neighbors as ourselves, we must pretty much have open borders, open arms to all immigrants. The Christian left, if you can really call them that, have managed to criticize President Trump's firmness on border security, identity of citizenship, refugee policy. The leftist churches have criticized that as intolerant, unwelcome, and hateful. But I think actually there is a right idea within, in consistent with following the scriptures, that essentially says we do get to protect our country, that there is a right idea. So what is your thought to Christian America, who's concerned about Trump's immigration policy seeming too harsh in terms of the wall and stopping all of the penetration of the southern border?
You know, it's interesting, the left, the progressives that are so dismissive of Leviticus, all of a sudden love it when it talks about taking care of the stranger and the foreigner among us. So all of a sudden the left loves Leviticus. Figure that one out. But here's the thing. The Old Testament word, the Hebrew word for foreigner and sojourner among you, is not an illegal immigrant. It means the person who has decided to willingly subscribe to the policies of Israel. It is the person who basically is the legal immigrant who's coming in and saying, I'll live by your policies. I want to obey your laws and I want to be one of you. That's the Hebrew word for foreigner and sojourner among you. It isn't the illegal immigrant. It is the immigrant who's willingly complying with your national identity. That is true. In fact, there's a scholar from Wheaton College who wrote an article on this where he dissected the Old Testament language with regard to immigration. So don't tell me that the Bible says you've got to welcome everybody who wants to illegally enter your country. That's not true. The Old Testament doesn't say that, nor does the New Testament. Jesus was not an illegal immigrant when he was taken as a child to Egypt by Mary and Joseph. They went there legally and they complied with the rules, the regulations, and the laws of Egypt. Therefore, their argument just implodes upon itself. And by the way, if you want to start waving the banner of Leviticus, then let's talk about all of Leviticus, which comes with some of the sexual standards, too, that they want to dismiss.
No, you don't understand the way it works. You see, you can pick and choose the scriptural passages. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh,
Dr.
yeah.
Piper, you didn't understand that. That's how the left works. Pick this, not that.
Really?
So, Dr. Piper, I cannot thank you. It was just so much fun to talk with you. I want to share with our listeners that, first of all, on Twitter, you're at Dr. Everett Piper, at Dr. Everett Piper, and your website, dreverettpiper.com. I will tell our listeners that some groups in Dallas have invited Dr. Piper to speak here, and he's coming here again. If your organization of any kind wants to have a really engaging well-informed and just inspired talk. He's a great one to look at. Check out his website, check out his writing in Washington Times. And Dr. Piper, thank you so much.
Thank you, Debbie. Appreciate you having me on.
Great to have you.